Alright folks, today I'm here to present to you yet another case of environmental storytelling in the Walking Dead universe. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the series by now, but just in case you're new here, environmental storytelling is a technique where a series of objects or bodies will be laid out in a way that conveys a story to the viewer without explicitly stating what that story is. At this point, I feel like I could make a t-shirt out of that spiel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you a sort of 2-for-1 as I'm going to take a closer look at the scene left behind at the Sunrise Auto Insurance Building featured in The Walking Dead Season 6, Episode 6, as well as the remnants of the battle on the bridge, which are events I believe are linked due to their close proximity, among other reasons we will explore shortly. I'm going to structure this video by taking you through the story as it was first presented to us, before going back and attempting to piece together the evidence to figure out what happened here. These videos aren't meant to convince you I'm right or anything like that, just to breathe new life into smaller topics within this franchise. We will probably never actually get answers to these questions anyway, so it's all just for fun in the end. If you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments down below, and drop a sub to see more videos like this. After an ambush by an unknown group separates Abraham and Sasha from Daryl as they lead the mega horde away from Alexandria, the two determine the best way to find a tracker was to stay put and let him come to them. So taking refuge in a small barren town on the outskirts of DC, Abraham spots a lone walker that he wishes to put down, but needing to be covert and not draw attention to the area, Sasha scolds him for being reckless and stubborn, which is a theme we're going to see continue throughout this analysis. But entering the open door of an abandoned Sunrise Auto Insurance building intending to lie low until found, the two discover the place ransacked as papers and other office supplies lie scattered all around. In a private office, Abraham comes upon what was once an unnamed soldier's decorated uniform jacket with pins and ribbons indicating experience in combat, alongside an old photo of this individual and his family. Now, this of course is meant to reflect Abraham's desire to keep his people safe and start another family of his own, but it's also meant to give us a bit of insight into the background of somebody working here, possibly a manager. But why is that important to know? Well, moving into an open workspace, Sasha sits watching the reanimated body of a man who locked himself inside an office before turning. Inside, we can see bloodied gauze and an assortment of medical supplies from a first aid kit scattered across a desk, directly underneath a whiteboard with a message reading, "Proud to have provided value. I pray for the world. Keep going, stay cheerful. The bites kill," with a bloodied smear running down to the bottom. Clearly, this person was bit and tried to patch themselves up, but upon growing sick from the infection, discovered this to be a death sentence and a cause for turning before locking themselves away to prevent any harm to others, which by itself shows honor, but also tells us whatever happened here occurred within a couple days of the outbreak, as most figured out bites killed pretty early on in the timeline. This individual was inherently positive and thinking of others even in their final moments. They were proud to have provided value, whatever form that took, which, in my opinion, sound like personality traits that could apply to a highly respected and selfless ex-soldier. Although Abraham once again is itching to put this thing down, but in Sasha's mind, this is a great lesson in self-control for the bull-headed man, as every unnecessary risk puts himself and the ones he loves in danger. Although sitting still isn't really in his nature, so while looting the upper levels of the office building in an attempt to distract himself, Abraham spots a scene in the distance that catches his eye, as across the establishment lies what looks to be the remnants of some sort of battle on a bridge that at first glance appears to have been lost by the US military. A truck fully loaded with all sorts of weapons sits in the middle of a trash-riddled overpass while the reanimated corpse of a single soldier dangles over the edge, impaled by what looks to be a military perimeter fence that was in the process of being set up before it was struck by another vehicle that we barely see in frame. This is a rather strange scene as we don't see a single corpse outside the impaled soldier anywhere on the bridge, at least from the side we are shown. If this was a fight against the dead, where are the bodies? Fear Season 1 shows us the military figured out how to put these things down pretty quick, so what gives? Well, we know something had to have gone wrong here, as the truck along with its cargo lie riddled with bullet holes. And we all know the dead don't shoot back, so I think whatever went down here was a result of human conflict brought on by surprise. Abraham discovers a box of cigars that look to have only had 1 or 2 smoked. So between that and the barely set up perimeter, I can't imagine the soldiers were posted here very long before things went bad. Even more so as Abraham notices a fully loaded RPG around the hanging soldier's shoulder, which he recklessly attempts and fails to grab as his frustrations with inactivity peak. Although moments later, after taking Sasha's advice and giving up on the risk, the corpse falls to the ground below, leaving the RPG dangling for Abraham to grab, which in his eyes was a sign from a higher power to take hold of his life while he still had time. So returning to Sasha at the insurance building, Abraham does exactly that by essentially confessing his feelings for her while leaving the walker alive in the office, telling us he really has taken her words to heart. He could have kept fighting back against the walker for the RPG and possibly died trying, but instead he restrained himself to prevent the risk and was rewarded for it. So donning the military suit jacket out of confidence while removing the pins as not to claim to be something he's not, Daryl tracks them down in a vehicle just as Sasha expected as the 3 journey back to Alexandria with Abraham seeing a new view of the future. Alright, now, in my opinion, the events within the auto insurance building flow really well with the events on the bridge when you start thinking of ways they could connect. But it's how this battle scene is shot that leaves a lot of frustrations for someone like me trying to figure out what happened here. We are barely shown the actual crash on screen, which leaves a ton of questions. There are no bodies on the side of the bridge we see, but are there on the other side of this mess? Could there be bodies underneath the bridge that fell off? We are never actually shown, which makes my job more difficult. But to be honest, I think it was a budget thing as it is a pretty brief scene. However, that still leaves the question of what the hell happened here. We know from across the franchise the military was sent in to evacuate citizens to the big cities from towns without points designated as safe zones like how we see in the webisode Torn Apart, while the soldiers put down anything dead or alive in the medical centers to stop the spread of infection. With evidence of this being a human attack, I'd suspect the same happened in this town, and those who came for the military were the loved ones of the infected put down in their local hospital. Although the weaponry lies untouched in the vehicle, which may point to these attackers actually losing, as most would have taken it given they survived. But where does the turned individual in the office come in? Well, as mentioned, I believe this person was the ex-soldier we saw in the photo. I'm not going to pretend these are the same actors, but given 2 years of deterioration, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility these are the same people. Sure, this could be some random guy who made his way in after getting bit given their regular attire, but that wouldn't really make for an interesting story as it would end at face value. And to be honest, I think having an ex-soldier taking shelter directly across from a battle scene is a bit too perfect of a setup to ignore its connections. The phrasing, "I'm proud to have provided value," could be referring to their discovery of bites killing you, but in my mind, I think it might insinuate this individual helped the soldiers outside during their conflict instead of evacuating, which makes sense given their assumed background. I've noticed in a lot of these environmental scenes, the themes reflected in the dead mirror the characters discovering the tragedy. So applying Abraham's arc throughout the episode, perhaps this individual too was confident and headstrong, but reckless. Regardless, I'm now going to attempt to connect all the evidence and piece together a story as to what happened here, but again, I am just theorizing based on what I've noticed, so it's entirely possible I could misinterpret or miss some evidence altogether. But like always, this is where you guys come in. I'd love to hear what you believe happened here in the comments down below. When the dead rose on the day of August 27th, 2010, the military were quick to jump into action across the country. Hospitals were declared unsalvageable, so despite some patients having yet to turn, The soldiers had executed them anyway in an attempt to prevent the spread. Designated safe zones with strategic advantages for on-foot combat were set up in both rural and urban areas. But with the army's numbers stretched, the healthy civilians of many smaller towns nearing major metropolitan cities were gonna have to be evacuated instead. Such as the case with a town located outside of DC that was the home of Sunrise Auto Insurance, an establishment with a cheerful yet stubborn manager who had served in the army in the past, but now reminisced on his time fighting for his country as an injury in combat forced him to retire. He was a family man to the core, but also an overwhelmingly loyal ally to his fellow brothers in arms, as all he ever wanted to do was protect the ones he loved. So while everyone else was bolting in confusion without looking back, intending to reach the evacuation site for their own safety, this individual had looked out for their family by rushing back to their home before assuring they reached the helicopters without harm, but wouldn't join himself as there were many others in need of help across the town. Despite the formal jacket in his office, this individual didn't have time to keep up optics, as he would go door to door searching for survivors to escort. And although his injury still held him back physically, fighting through the pain was worth it, albeit exhausting. Soldiers attempting to set up barriers for the dead in order to create safe roads to evacuation sites had accepted this man's help as they witnessed his bravery, respected his past position, and were short on men. But in spite of the military's good intentions at this time, not all viewed their presence as a positive. Many civilians had taken their sick loved ones to the hospitals thinking they would be helped much like any other illness, but instead would hear the gunshots and see the body bags, causing a full-on revolt as they didn't understand what was going on or what the walkers were. Even more so as the freshly turned in the streets that looked nearly indistinguishable from the living were gunned down in front of them, making the others believe these evacuation sites were taking their neighbors to their deaths. Which they were kind of right, but it wasn't their intention at this time. So while debriefing in what was once his office after helping establish the barrier, the ex-soldier would suddenly hear the sound of an accelerating vehicle that he witnesses slam into the fence at full force through the window, followed by a barrage of gunfire from the other side. The enraged civilians were ready to attack with everything they had to break through the barrier, and in their eyes, free the others from the evacuation site. This was no longer just a fight against the dead, but the living as well. Many of the soldiers had been shot, trapped under the rubble, or had fallen over the bridge to their death. Those left over would be pinned down, injured, in shock, and outnumbered despite their more advanced weaponry as they were not anticipating a human attack. But after witnessing the impaled soldier hanging over the bridge reanimate despite not receiving a bite, they would soon realize they didn't have to take them all out, just a few, and nature would do the rest, which would cause the situation to become dire for the opposition as the battlefield had slowly devolved into a bloody feeding for the dead. The aggressive civilians were unaware headshots were what took these things out, so they wouldn't really be much of a match. However, instead of taking advantage of the situation and fleeing, the servicemen would use this opportunity to assist the injured allies they could who still remained pinned but alive under the fence's rubble while fending off the freshly turned. The ex-soldier viewing from the office window knew he couldn't just stand there and watch, so ignoring his injury and sprinting out to the bridge as fast as he could, this individual had rushed in to assist the others in lifting their herd out of the mess. But unfortunately, he wouldn't be quick enough to slip away from the dead as a consequence of overworking his injury, and would suffer a bite from a straggling walker as a result of his selflessness and recklessness. It wasn't yet known by this individual this would be fatal, but it was by the soldiers who had already taken off from the scene in their trucks without looking back, leaving both he and their turned allies behind. Without anywhere left to go as they wouldn't make it back to the evacuation site on time, the ex-soldier returns to his office nearby where he attempts to patch up his wound. But as the infection begins to set in while his health quickly declines, he soon comes to the realization bites were what killed. The soldiers hadn't abandoned him because they were scared or because they were cowards. They did it because he was a lost cause, unlike their injured allies, which was a sacrifice he now understood. So wanting to make something positive out of this, the man cracks open the building's front door in hopes of one day attracting a survivor, as he locks himself inside his office while writing a final message to the world. A message of hope and knowledge as he begins to fade away mid-sentence. To most, this would be seen as a tragedy, but to the ex-soldier, this was a successful mission as many lives were saved. And as he slips down the whiteboard while succumbing to the infection, the last thought on his mind would be that of his family, who he too got to safety. Or so he believed. In time, the Turned had wandered away from the bridge, circling the same town blocks they used to walk when they were alive. But the reanimated ex-soldier would mill around for many months before his message would be seen. A message that was discovered far too late to make a difference. Alright, now, I know this interpretation isn't perfect, but it was definitely a fun creative exercise. Again, without seeing the full scale of this bridge fight, it's hard to determine who the attackers were, but I think my theory at least makes sense if we extrapolate information from across the series. This interpretation shows the strength and unity and the sacrifice this world requires, but also the inevitable tragedy of it all being for nothing in true The Walking Dead fashion. It's entirely possible I'm just connecting dots that weren't meant to be connected with the man in the office, the soldier, and the bridge fight, but that's the beauty of these videos. Maybe you think I'm right on the money, or maybe you think I'm completely wrong. Either way, I want to hear your theories on what you think happened in the comments down below. In the end, it doesn't really matter what went down here, as the scene serves its purpose as a reflection of Abraham's story. But it's these types of background set pieces that make this world feel lived in, and most importantly, scary. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.